We're here today to share the stories of our Collegiate Mental Health Innovation Council members. CMHIC is dedicated to finding and highlighting student leaders who filled gaps in traditional supports and services on their campus. Stay tuned to hear their stories and their programs in their own words.
Hi everyone, I'm here with Goel, a member of last year's Collegiate Mental Health Innovation Council. Anu is a student at William & Mary in Virginia, and she works on mental health and is involved with residential life, and her program is really cool because it's integrating not only the importance of mental health and well-being, but really literally building it into residential life in a community as opposed to making people leave where they're most comfortable to get some additional support. So I'm going to open it up to Anu to share a little bit about her background and story and kind of a little bit about the program and how this all came to be.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anu. I am a senior at William & Mary, and a lot of people in Virginia, at least, will have heard that William & Mary is probably the most stressful school. There's a lot of stress culture here with people almost bragging about how stressed they are. Our counseling center has a 40-day wait list. So it's, I guess, although people care about mental health here, it seems like we're not meeting a place where we can allocate enough resources for the amount of issues that we're having. And that's really hard to see considering that we are relatively a small school for a public school. But even the reason I got so involved in this is because I've had my own dealings with mental health with friends and myself, and I always noticed that as a residence life employee, I received the most support from residence life. Like with the dean of students and the counseling center, there was so much bureaucratic red tape around that. A lot of it was related to liability and just not having enough resources, but I was able to work with residence life repeatedly. They've been very accommodating, and I think that was a really special relationship that I built with my employers and my coworkers that I felt needed to be extended campus-wide, because I know a lot of people feel very kind of outcasted by the administration when they have mental health issues, particularly at William & Mary. And I think that I would have felt the same way had I not had the opportunity to work for residence life and build these relationships and find this other way to engage in resources. And as an employee, I know that we are really big resources for other students, especially when they're in crisis. It's our job to report it if we're faced with it. And that's a lot to take on as a peer rather than as somebody who's really an authority figure or adult or is trained in this extensively. Of course, we have our training every year, every semester, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done in how to really prepare students to deal with other students' crises, and that includes confidentiality, which I know a lot of people are almost scared to come to their RA or their work life staff member because it's another student and you don't know, are they really going to keep this private, or are they going to tell their best friend? And that's really hard to navigate. But sometimes I think part of it is just having time to yourself to calm down, which is kind of where we got the Brown Hall proposal from. And we are looking, I believe we're the first college to do this, or one of the first. We are looking into, or we are actually, building safe spaces in residence life buildings. So when you're having that crisis and you just need a safe place, you don't have to run out to the counseling center or panic and you just need to get away from your roommate, or you just need to be alone and calm down. that's kind of, we're trying to create that space in what is really a lot of students' home for the 4 years that they're here. Many students tend to stay on campus, and we have a lot of, obviously, freshman housing, but also undergrad housing, which is always full. So we thought it was a really valuable opportunity to take advantage of space that is no longer being used for something more productive and more supportive of the general student body, which is where the Brown Hall project started.
Awesome. So basically, the Brown Hall project is taking space that wasn't being used in the residence halls and converting it into a wellness space where anybody can basically go at any time. One of the hard things about not just freshman year, but transitioning to dorm life is not having your own room, especially if you're used to having your own room. And then if you're, struggling with mental health, I think it's really hard if you don't feel like you literally have anywhere to go to calm down, especially if you're only in a shared space, right?
Right.
And can you talk, I guess, a little bit more about the actual space, like what, where it came from? I think for students who would be interested in pitching something similar on their campuses.
So it's kind of funny the way this all started. So William and Mary is the oldest college in America. Our whole thing is like Harvard is technically the oldest, but they were just the first to be chartered. We were the first one to actually be an established college. So a part of that is that we have really outdated buildings, especially our freshman dorms. My freshman dorm was awful. But so Brown Hall is one of our freshman dorms, and we have a lot of the dorms have kitchenettes in them. And a parent came up to my direct supervisor on like day for admitted students, and she was like, I was looking at the kitchenette in my like son's dorm, and I'm pretty sure like he's gonna like die of a fire in there. And my boss was like, oh, that's not good. So she had it inspected, and it turned out that, yeah, in fact, like they were like out of code and just outdated and no longer safe. So part of that was like they knew they would have to like update the kitchen space, but these kitchenettes, they're so small and not really useful. So it was like it wasn't necessarily worth it to update the kitchenettes rather than just the main kitchen space. So then we had these like empty spaces in that hall, and we were thinking about what to do with them. And then we kind of thought about, so we just opened the big wellness center at William and Mary, and they also have wellness rooms. And those have been a huge success. Like people have really been using them. They're always booked up. So we thought, what if we incorporated that into halls, and Brown Hall is kind of like our trial to see how it goes before we move to other halls. Because we're hoping, considering that like the wellness center is always booked up, this will create more availability, and it's just easier. Because I feel like when you're in that crisis, you're not like, oh, let me walk 20 minutes to the wellness center and then be in a safe space. This is just like, it's right there, and you can go and you can calm down. So we kind of were inspired by that, and like having this space that was essentially just going to be empty. So we decided that that was something we wanted to look into, and the Wellness Center had offered like to donate a lot of their leftover materials and stuff like that, which was really great. So like the size is pretty limited considering it's a kitchenette, but it's really supposed to be for one person, and it's just supposed to be a safe place. So like we're hoping that we can like incorporate that if it is successful in other halls, with just basically like these small spaces. Like there's so many like closets that are like big for closets, but like small for like anything else that we've like looked into and stuff like that. So we kind of are just hoping that we can utilize these old spaces and update them in a more like productive and useful way to like our student body. And we've done a lot of research. Like we're only using grays, teals, and gold because those are research-based from the Wellness Center, actually, for like the best kind of colors to like surround somebody with, like having like mental health issues, like they're very calming and stuff like that. So we're definitely trying to make it as safe and welcoming as possible.
Will this be distinct from, you talked about the Wellness Center being booked up a lot by students wanting that space. Will you envision, you know, if it's successful and the spaces are expanded, do you envision them as reservable rooms or more like available for whoever, more kind of crisis?
I think we're hoping for them to be more just available for whoever. Maybe like a closed door policy. If the door is closed, you probably, like, somebody's in there. Because I think part of being in crisis is you can't book a room. Like, I can't predict, like, that I'm going to be in crisis in a week. So I think, and that's what's hard about the counseling center here, where it's like, there's a lot of talk about how we have all these counselors and all these resources, but if you have to wait for 40 days, I mean, I don't know what that looks like for a lot of people, like, because so much can change in 40 days, and like the crisis you're having now can get worse. It can be a different crisis, so I just don't think it's very as productive, especially considering that the counseling center is for short-term crises, and you need to see somebody outside of William and Mary who you can be referred to by the counseling center for long-term. So I'm like, but if you're trying to get an appointment for a short-term crisis, you have to wait for 40 days. It kind of defeats the purpose. And a lot of students like have had a really hard time with that. Like, I have personally heard stories of people who are like, I can't get into the counseling center. Like, I don't understand. I thought they said they had all these new counselors. So we're kind of hoping this is just available, like, on demand, of course, unless somebody else is using it. But as we expand, I'm hoping there will be enough around campus.
So, or you talked about if it's successful. So how are you all planning on measuring whether or not this is successful?
I think we're just going to really monitor kind of how much it's being used. We're going to put in a lot of like aromatherapy supplies, essential oils, lava lamps and stuff like that. So we're and so I guess part of that will be monitoring, like, is this stuff being used? And I think we're going to just see, like, if students are utilizing the space or if it's just sitting there and, like, it's just like that closet that was there anyways, you know? So we also would like to, like, probably communicate with the students living in that residence hall just to see how they feel about it, and if it has benefited them in any way, and stuff like that.
Do you have, so I guess, do you have any plans on potentially tying it into something like a peer support program, or, you know, is this tied to kind of any support that somebody can get while they're waiting for a short-term appointment 40 days out?
We haven't discussed it, but I don't think that's necessarily off the table. I think because it's a pilot program, we still have a lot of work to do and, like, really finalizing how far we want to take this and what our long-term goals are. But I think right now we're just mostly thinking about, you know, how to expand this and how to bring this, like, into the community, just as at least a safe space, like, when you are in that crisis. Because I think a lot of people, even when they're in crisis, it's hard to make it to the counseling center, even if you do have an appointment. Like, people just need to calm down, and like the blackout curtains and, like, the comfy sofa, we're just hoping it's just a place where people can, like, come together and take their time and just, like, let it out without feeling overwhelmed or, like, uncomfortable because the roommate's in the room or anything else like that.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. Like you said, I don't schedule my crises. They just kind of happen. And I think going to where people are is always the best way to approach things. I'm curious about your perspective as an RA and being involved in residence life. I've heard a lot from folks in that space that they're really seeing a lot of, we talk about students, many students really struggling and asking for help. And I think the discussion about how RAs are involved in that doesn't happen enough. Because even though there's training, I think it's hard to know what to do. And on the other side, I think a lot of students might not know that they can reach out to their RAs too.
Yeah, so I'm actually a CA, which is I work I'm a community advocate, and I work with RAs, and I act as a liaison between RAs and head staff. So I basically work with all of Res Life. So it's interesting for me because I've definitely seen perspectives of like head staff acting on a crisis versus RAs. And I think definitely like the training is important, but I don't think it necessarily guides you as much as you really need, especially in those really hard crises. I guess one of the things about William & Mary is that there's always somebody on head staff on call. So the area director, like the adult that's in charge of the RAs in that specific area, dorms, there's always somebody on call. So if there's a crisis, one of the big things for RAs is to call their area director who will answer for help. And I think that's really useful just because if you are in that position and you don't know what to do, there's somebody who is more trained, more equipped, and more experienced to help you. But yeah, I think it would be more useful for residents to know that they can come to their RA. I think freshmen particularly are able to build this relationship with their RA where like if they are having a crisis, they go to their RA because their RA is really guiding them when they first come to college. But I think what happens is you turn into a graduate, like an upperclassman, you don't really even talk to your RA. Like I live in the graduate housing because I'm an employee, and I have, other than at work, I've never like spoken to my RA. So I think that makes it hard because you kind of assume like I'm my own person now, I'm independent, and you stop thinking of them as resources. Also because you get closer to like the same age, like you can be a sophomore and have a sophomore RA, and it's a little weirder, whereas when you're a freshman, the person is always older than you, so it still feels like you're kind of speaking to some kind of authority. But if I'm sitting here like talking to another senior, I feel like it's just a little odd, and like maybe we all know like the same people because we're in the same class, and it makes things a little harder. So I wish that there were more conversation around, speaking to your RA is confidential in terms of peers. I think one big problem, misunderstanding is mandatory reporting at William & Mary and RAs and CAs. If we're told on the job, we are mandatory reporters. So like, I think that's really hard for people to navigate if they're friends with an employee, because part of that is I want to share with my friend that this is going on, but my friend has to report it because of their job, and there's like a lot of liability there. So I think there needs to be more conversation about like what you can share with your RA, but what will have to be reported and what can be kept confidential. And I think that we do a good job like training RAs like on the protocol if somebody's having a crisis, but I think that like specific like mental health training is something that we don't really do. Like we just say like, okay, these are our procedures, meet, and there's one more, and like this is what happens when that happens, and your job is to call this person. But it's also like, I think we could use more training regarding like how to calm down that person in the meantime while they're waiting for the area director or the police or whoever, and how to appropriately ask questions about the situation without overstepping or making the person uncomfortable, and stuff like that.
It can make such a huge difference if the person, right, you might not want to be waiting at all for wherever you might be forced to be going. And the person who's there talking to you and the type of questions they ask and all that stuff, I know from my experience, one time in a situation involved with the police department, the police officer was so nice and so accepting and so understanding that it helped partially distract me from the horrible stuff that was happening, but it just made such a big difference. Like, if it had been handled in a different way, I think that it would have made a traumatic situation way more traumatizing.
And I think it's also, especially when you're in a situation where something is happening to you that you don't want, like, you don't want to be taken to the hospital for an assessment or whatever it is, it's really easy to feel like everybody is against you. So, like, having that support from your RA and feeling like this person is here for me, like, they're not trying to get me in trouble, they're trying to help me, I think is really valuable, because I think a lot of times students feel that they need to, like, cover up their mental health and stuff like that, because they're scared of what the consequences, particularly at William and Mary, are, which are often, like, being asked or forced to withdraw from the university, whether you want to or not, whether it would be beneficial to your mental health or not. And that includes, like, for a lot of students, doctors recommend, like, do not have a student leave school. It's going to make their mental health worse. Being at home, not being productive, all their friends, their support system at school, watching them move on, like, that is really hard to go through when you are struggling already, and sometimes time off is a great thing, and people have been so grateful for that opportunity, but a lot of other times people are very upset about it. And I think just having, like, one person who technically works for the school, like, knowing they're in your corner rather than pushing that on you or feeling like they're pushing that on you, even if they're not, is something that would be really valuable if we could, like, work on that more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think just, you know, even if, like you said, like, even if it is a situation, having somebody who can explain to you what's happening, right? Because you might hear that, you know, there's plenty to be discussed about people mandatory withdrawals, schools discriminating against students with disabilities, but even if you want to take time off, even if you're like, okay, I want to go to the hospital, a lot of students, if you haven't been to the hospital before and you don't know anybody who's talked about it, have no idea what's going to happen. And oftentimes, you know, not always, but sometimes you can be handcuffed. Sometimes you have to go with police officers, you know, like, having somebody trained who knows what's going to happen, I think, can make a really big difference to just, like, de-escalating, even when it's voluntary.
Yeah, because I was speaking to an officer, and she told me one time that she told me she does rides for assessments at the hospital pretty frequently, and she said, like, people will literally run away from her, and she has to chase them down, which obviously makes the situation worse because providers see that as, like, serious distress. But I think part of that running away is, like, I'm scared, I don't know what's happening, like, I don't know what it means that they're sending me to the hospital. Like, am I going to come back? I don't want to be assessed because I'm, like, I don't know what that means for me after the fact. Not necessarily that, like, I am so unequipped to take care of myself that I'm running away from help. So I think having somebody explain that rather than just sending officers to your door, which is what happens here, would be really valuable, just because I think it's really scary to open the door and see, like, officers telling you they're here and they're taking you down to the hospital and they know you're in crisis and they have all this information about you that you may have not, that you might have, like, not wanted to go that far. So, I mean, it makes me feel bad for the people who, like, ran away from the officer, because I know how that's going to be perceived, but that's not necessarily the intention.
Like, I went from making decisions about my healthcare to now I don't get to make the decisions about my healthcare, and that shift in power over your own life can be really scary. And I think sometimes, you know, when you have a mental health label put on you, understandable behavior gets turned into evidence that, you know, you're this or you're that. So, you
Right.
know, definitely. So I think there is a huge need for not only more training for folks, but I think even something like what you've created as a place where instead of having getting into an argument or having somebody express concern about you, if you on your own accord know that there's a space for you to go in crisis, it can help stop students from having these horrible situations happen unnecessarily.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of what we're hoping for. Like, we just want students to feel safe, and like dorms are literally, you know, where you're living, where you're waking up, where a lot of students have been eating, socializing, especially as freshmen. And we just think that it would be really beneficial to have a resource like right where you are, rather than having to like run around looking for help. And I think it just makes it less. A lot of times when you're in crisis, a lot of things that you're doing are evidence, as you mentioned, and I think it just makes it easier where you can just go from point A to point B without like a whole mess being created with a bunch of people getting involved. Because like we are, like when you come to school, you are an adult, you are independent, and I think it's really hard when people get too involved, even if their intentions are good, in your personal life, because it's like, it feels like they're forgetting that like you are now an adult and you know how to make decisions for yourself, and like if you need help, there is like an appropriate way for that to be provided for you, rather than people just coming in and deciding they're going to help you.
So, I mean, all of the things that you've described are incredibly important, and I think I'm really excited to see how the pilot turns out and to see if more schools can replicate how you are all creating something new and really cool and important. One of the things that I've been asking everyone is, you know, if another student would be interested in doing something similar, or who hears this and is like, oh my gosh, this is what we need, this would have helped me, this will help my peers, where should they get started, or like what advice would you have for them if they want to do something like this? Because I know your case was very specific. You just so happened to be violating codes in buildings, and you know, figured out a better way to use the space.
I think one way to start, I mean, of course, it worked out for me as a residence life employee, so I was already in with residence life, but I think, you know, residence life is often overlooked as a resource, and I think getting in touch with residence life staff and being like, hey, I really want to improve like mental health resources within residence life. Like, I think that is a really big value to residence life. Most offices at most schools, because they understand that this is your home and this is where you're going to have a lot of your crises, and this is where you're going to need your resources. So I think a big part of that is just getting in contact, because like, well, for us, like, because we have this communication with the parent and all this res life knowledge, like we could kind of like kick it off like pretty quickly. But even getting in touch with res life, like you can find out if there are spaces that aren't being utilized to their best potential. Because I'm sure, I mean, most colleges have pretty old dorm buildings, at least for for freshmen, and I think a big part of that is just finding that space. So I think just I would always encourage people to look at residence life as a resource, and not just like as an administrative, like these people give me my housing and that's it, because I think that's what residence life is seen as, is like they just assign your housing, but they do have a lot of like power and information that could really be beneficial to somebody who wants to try to start this program, because I'm sure there are a lot of spaces in a lot of different universities and buildings that aren't being utilized. And I know that for us, like we're even thinking about eventually expanding this to academic buildings. So, I mean, there's just such a broad, like, category, I guess, of types of places that you can build these little spaces, and they don't have to be very large. So I think the best place to start is speaking with somebody who knows about these buildings and these spaces to see if you have any kind of space that could be updated, or that isn't being used, or that's just so old that there's a better use for it, I guess.
Awesome. Well, yeah, this is a really important perspective I think that we haven't heard, or we haven't focused on, at least so far and in the past year or so. So I appreciate you taking the time and being part of the council and sharing all this information with everyone. And for those who are interested in learning more, definitely check out the college report that's coming out. That'll be out in October. And especially look at Anu's part, and you can reach out to her with any questions, and hopefully the program will do well and expand, and more schools can bring the models to their campuses as well. Thanks.
Thank you.